Well, Gonzaga is looking for somebody to replace Alex Toohey on the roster, and they found a target in Marcus Adams Jr., a four-star prospect who just decommitted from Kansas. Could Mark Few land an elite developmental piece?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. We got a pair of former Zags who are set to represent Team Canada potentially in the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris. We're going to cover that as well as go over my three bold predictions from last season. Two of them we're going to laugh about, as we always do on bold predictions, but one of them I actually got right, so stick around to hear what that was. But first, we got to talk about another rumored addition for Gonzaga. Mark Few and the staff have been busy. The last few weeks, we've heard so many rumors about Paul Mulcahy, about Joe Toussaint, about Jeremiah Williams. Of course, the recent rumors heating up are about Jose Perez out of West Virginia. But amidst all of that, the Zags also lost a player in Alex Toohey. We covered that. The Australian who decided to stay in Australia, play professionally, rather than coming to Spokane. And it created a situation where Gonzaga went from having 2 open scholarship spots to 3. And we know they're going to fill at the very least one of those spots, but it seems likely they could fill 2 of them and might look to fill one of those spots with somebody who maybe wouldn't necessarily be a member of the rotation for next year. The Zags pretty much have 6 or 7 spots in that rotation locked down for next year. If they add Jose Perez, that's probably your full rotation. So how do you fill those roster spots without, by adding players who aren't necessarily going to play next year? That's a difficult task to do. But the Zags found a target that may work in that situation, perhaps. And that would be Marcus Adams Jr. Marcus Adams Jr. is a 6'8" forward from Harbor City, California, initially a member of the 2024 recruiting class, and a player who kind of shot up shot up boards, shot up lists for the class. He had a really strong season last year. He did not have any high major offers before the start of the 2023 calendar year. And then he he had 4 before January 23rd in 2023. He had 4 high major offers. From January 23rd until March, he picked up 9. And that includes Kansas, that includes Syracuse, that includes UCLA. He took official visits at all 3 of those schools, ultimately decided to commit to Kansas on March 7th, right before the start of the NCAA tournament. And then he reclassified to the class of 2023 and got set to join the Jayhawks this year. So we're talking about a player who is very young, a player who is, should in theory still be in high school, similar to the Ben Gregg situation. Of course, Ben showed up to Gonzaga a half semester early, not because of a reclassification specifically, but because of COVID rules allowed him to do so. His season got bagged. He ended up graduating early, joined the team a little earlier. But for Marcus Adams Jr., he's just a straight reclassification, decided he wanted to start college a year sooner, got his high school education taken care of ahead of time, and is now available to do so. However, on Sunday, he announced that he is decommitting from Kansas and is looking to find his new home. He said thank you to Bill Self, thank you to everybody who recruited me, thank you to the Jayhawks fans. I'm just looking for an opportunity that I think will be better suited for me. This was a tough decision, etc., etc. Right now, 24/7 Sports has him ranked 48th nationally in the class of 2023, so he is a similar prospect in that recruiting class to Dusty Stromer, who is generally in the 40 to 50 range as well. So that's kind of the general look at Marcus Adams, a very high-level athlete, had a 50-point, 20-rebound game in high school at one point. Some of the knocks on him were that he didn't play against particularly elite competition in high school, and there's a lot of rawness to his game. So again, he kind of fits the mold of a developmental piece. Now, Gonzaga is far from the only school who's interested. I'm reading a tweet here from Joe Tipton of Tipton Edits of On3, and he listed all of the schools that have contacted Marcus Adams so far. This tweet came out merely hours before this podcast was recorded and released, so this is up-to-date information. The schools that have contacted Marcus Adams so far, Gonzaga is among them, as well as West Virginia, BYU, Oregon, Binghamton, Missouri, San Diego, Boston College, Mississippi State, and UC Santa Barbara. So the first impressions here of that list is that Gonzaga's in a pretty good spot. Of course, this depends on what Marcus Adams Jr. wants. I think it is possible that the reason he decided to decommit from Kansas is because he did not see immediate playing time available for him. I would caution players who reclassify and are going to be very, very young incoming freshmen to not necessarily expect immediate playing time, but a lot of times players who choose to reclassify, that is the reason that they are doing so, is so that they can play right away. There are schools on this list that are going to be able to offer a top 50 recruit with his kind of athleticism and overall skills more immediate playing time, whether he is ready for it or not, I guess. Gonzaga would not be in that camp. I don't think Gonzaga is going to add a player like Marcus Adams Jr. with the expectation that he is in their rotation next season. I don't really see that being the case. They would add him and they would sell him on the prospect of developing in the system the way that so many other players have. The way that Corey Kispert did, the way that Julian Strawther did, the way that Adam Morrison did, if you want to throw it way back. We're just talking about 6'8" forwards specifically, because that is who Marcus Adams Jr. is, the way that Rui Hachimura did. Like, this is, Gonzaga has developed this type of player over the course of multiple years and turned them into NBA players regularly. I mean, it happens pretty often for Gonzaga. So that is the sales pitch. Whether that's the sales pitch Marcus Adams Jr. wants to hear is not something I don't know. I don't know where he is at with that. Again, 2 hours ago, as I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, is when we found out that Gonzaga contacted Marcus Adams Jr. So I don't know what the pitch is. I don't necessarily know what Adams is looking for. If he wants to be inserted into a starting lineup and play right away, Santa Barbara, Boston College could probably offer him that. San Diego, they could offer him that. They've lost a ton of talent for Steve Lavin. West Virginia, I don't think he starts right away for the Mountaineers, but boy, howdy, have they lost a lot of talent in this whole Bob Huggins saga. So there's potentially some room for him there. BYU, I don't know if he starts there either, but he would probably be more likely to play a consistent role. And so if you're BYU, if you're West Virginia, or even Oregon, who might be able to offer more playing time, and you say, hey, you can play right away in a high major, versus you go to Gonzaga and you don't get to play right away. That's going to be the trick. The trick for Gonzaga is figuring out how to convince him to come to their program if they're not necessarily going to play him right away, because that's the role that I envisioned for him were he to come to Spokane. He kind of fills the Alex Toohey role. For those of you who are longtime listeners, for those of you who are everyday listeners, shout out to you. You know that we talked about how Alex Toohey, in my mind, was likely to redshirt next year. I'm not convinced that he was going to redshirt, but I think that is the likeliest outcome for him had he stuck with the program. I don't think Marcus Adams Jr. will come to a school where he has to redshirt, because if he wanted to redshirt, he wouldn't have reclassified. He's not going to come all the way up to the class of 2023 to then sit out a year. Maybe he will. Maybe he's having a change of heart. Maybe he feels like that's a better option for him. I don't know. But it seems a little bit less likely to happen, considering what we know about him up to this point. But reading those scouting reports on Marcus Adams, rawness, upside, those are the key things that we've heard about him. 24/7 Sports' report all about Marcus Adams Jr. basically just talked about his upside and how he has, it's really tantalizing, but it's not there yet. I just want to read this quote again. This is from Eric Bossi at 24/7 Sports. He says, quote, "He plays with confidence, has a big personality, and is also obsessed with proving that he is not only deserving of the lofty ranking he earned during the season, but worthy of an even higher ranking." So this is a really tenacious dude, a big personality. He's got a lot of enthusiasm, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. There's a lot of things about that really fit at Gonzaga. Like, you can see the appeal. Gonzaga's had players like this in the past. They've had guys who've proven the rankings wrong. The development at Gonzaga is top tier, but we also know that player development is a part of college basketball that is kind of dwindling. Players are not often patient enough to wait for that development to occur. And Gonzaga has reached out to players and brought them in with the hope of developing them over time and have had it not work out. Alex Toohey is an example of that. Efton Reed is an example of that. Is a guy who came in with the expectation of hey, I'm not going to play a ton because I'm going to be behind Drew Timme. I'm going to be behind Anton Watson. He ends up getting passed by Ben Gregg and decides he doesn't want to wait it out. I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying that's what happened in that circumstance. Hunter Sallis, there's a big argument that he should have played more last year. I was in that camp, as many of you know, but he left because before he got that chance to fully blossom. I think he's going to blossom at Wake Forest, and we'll actually talk about him more later in the show. But it's hard to convince a player to come to your program when you know that they're not going to necessarily, when they're going to have to sit out or sit for a long period of time before they end up playing. If Gonzaga can convince Marcus Adams Jr. that is the route, then he would be an incredible addition. The kind of upside that he has and the kind of development that he could do playing behind Anton Watson, playing behind Jun Sakyo, playing behind Steel Venters, like he could grow into an elite athlete, an elite player in this program. If he's willing to A, come to Gonzaga in the first place, and B, still be here after a year, after 2 years, potentially. It's a big risk. It's a big ask. Not really a big risk. If he comes and he stays for a year and then he leaves, that sucks, but it's not killer for Gonzaga necessarily. It's worth taking that risk. You just don't know if it's going to pan out for a couple of years. Also, I think that Gonzaga could add both Marcus Adams Jr. and Jose Perez and call it an offseason. Perez fills the Malachi Smith role. Marcus Adams fills the Alex Toohey role. Bing, bang, boom. Mark Few can relax. You're done for the offseason. You got one scholarship left. You hold on to it. You leave it blank. Maybe you toss it to Colby Brooks in the second semester and you call it good. That is a dream scenario for how the rest of this offseason could go for Gonzaga, but it is a plausible one at this point here in the third week of July. Well, before last season, about August last year, I made 3 very, very bold predictions, 2 that we can laugh about now, and 1 that actually came true. More on all of that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets. That's up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under on runs scored to who you think is going to hit the first home run in the game. All of that bet on an app that is safe, it is secure, and it is super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There is no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. I appreciate each and every single one of you. We got more fantastic stuff coming your way later on the Locked On Zags podcast this week. Back-to-back guests. We're going to be talking Summer League. We're going to be talking WCC hoops. It's going to be a lot of fun stuff. We'll, of course, continue to keep you updated on what the heck Gonzaga might do with these final 3 roster spots as we continue to see more options creeping up in the transfer portal. For now, though, want to move on, want to talk about 3 bold predictions I made ahead of last season and whether they came true or not. And we're going to start with the one that did come true, the one that I actually got right, because the other 2 are fun to laugh at. But let's start on a high note, and we'll kind of come down a little bit after that. I wanted to acknowledge that when I make bold predictions, my goal is not necessarily to get them correct. I'm happy that I did in this case, but bold predictions are supposed to be bold, and they're supposed to be very unlikely to come true. And that's the way I treated these 2. They were a little bit extra spicy, or these 3 extra spicy in terms of the boldness. But the first one ended up happening on a sleepy winter day in Portland, Oregon in mid-January. And my prediction was that Julian Strawther is going to go score 40 or more points in a game last season. And he did. Against the Portland Pilots, again, at the Chiles Center in January. Julian Strawther went absolutely nuts against Shante Leggins' squad. 40 points, 8 of 12 shooting from deep, 14 of 21 for the game in general. I was at this game. A buddy of mine came down from Seattle. We went out to the game and had a chance to watch the Zags in person, one of the few times I got to see him last year. And man, it was a blast. I mean, what an incredible performance from Julian. And I remember talking about this in the bold prediction segment and kind of saying, look, he's an outside shooter, which always helps in terms of getting to 40 points. Drew Timme is a fantastic elite scorer, and he had 37 points in the game. He had 35 points in a couple games. Like, he could have gotten to 40. He never did, but he could have. But it's always easier to get there if you're a 3-point shooter. And for Julian, 24 of his 40 points came from the 3-point line. That was how he managed to get it done. Portland could not find him on the perimeter. He had 12 3-point attempts, knocked him down at a a really high 75% clip. It was an extraordinary performance from him. The first player to score 40 points in a game for Gonzaga since Kyle Wiltshire back in 2015. I believe that it was. Adam Morrison, of course, has done it before as well for the Zags. So it's kind of a bold prediction to say somebody's going to hit 40 for the first time in 8 years. But Julian Strawther managed to find a way to get it done. I was really happy. I'd kind of forgotten that I made this prediction. I actually had a longtime listener message me on Twitter after the game and said, "Hey, you got your bold prediction right." And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, "Oh, that's right." So I was really happy to see that end up happening. And I'm going to brag about it a little bit because these next two did not even come close to coming correct. We're going to talk about why that was and what it might mean for the team going forward. The next prediction I made, again, in August of last year before the 2022-23 college basketball season, was that Braden Huff is going to play more minutes than Ben Gregg and Kaden Perry combined. And I was off on this prediction by 428 minutes, which is the exact number of minutes, of course, that Ben Gregg played last season, because Kaden Perry and Braden Huff combined to play 0 minutes last year for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Perry, of course, dealing with more injury issues. He's had significant back and ankle issues since he got to Gonzaga. Has only played 8 games in the last 3 years for the Bulldogs. Very unfortunate to continue to see Kaden not be able to get onto the court. The expectation right now is that he is healthy. We've been seeing some videos from the Gonzaga Instagram account. We've seen some reports from him, and it sounds like he's healthy. It looks like he's healthy in the videos. He's running around, he's dunking, he's moving. Hopefully that is a situation for him. I would love nothing more than for Kaden Perry to bounce back and get to be a part of Gonzaga's actual playing time rotation next year. I don't think he's going to be a big time player necessarily next year. I don't see him in an 8 or even a 9-man rotation. He might kind of be that 9th man at this point, but just getting to see him on the basketball floor is something that I'm really excited about. However, he's going to compete with Braden Huff for minutes next year. Both those guys are kind of on the outside looking in of the rotation, at least as I see it right now. And both those guys, didn't play last year, and they both are very different skill sets, which is what makes the competition kind of interesting to me. Huff's more of a stretch 4, more expected to kind of be more of the Ben Gregg type of player, whereas Kaden Perry has always drawn comparisons to Brandon Clark. I think Brandon Clark light is a better way to put it. I don't know if he's going to reach those lofty expectations, especially after dealing with all of the injuries, but he's really bouncy. He's a really good low post scorer. He doesn't really stretch the floor much, but really high level finisher around the rim, good shot blocker, tough physical kid. And I think it was unfortunate that we didn't get to see either of them last year. I understand, of course, why Braden Huff redshirted. They didn't have minutes to go around for him. Certainly, if Kaden Perry was healthy enough to play, I think he would have gotten some playing time, but he was not and was unable to do so. And I think the main thing that this prediction reminds us is how surprising Ben Gregg's breakout was. It was bold to predict that Huff would play more than Ben and Perry combined, but we didn't know that Ben Gregg was going to do this. Going into the season, it looked like he was kind of on the outs of playing time as well. All 3 of these guys were kind of lumped together. Now we don't lump these 3 guys together anymore. We can lump Huff and Perry together as bigs on the roster who didn't play last year, but Ben Gregg played a valuable role. He looks like a guy who's going to compete for a starting spot next year. I'm not sure he'll get it, but it's between Anton Watson, Graham Ike, Ben Gregg, I think, are competing for 2 spots. And Ben is in that conversation. I mean, without a doubt in that conversation. There's possibility they could try to play some 3 big lineups, depending on how confident they feel about Watson or Gregg playing a little bit further away from the rim. But that's not a conversation we're having with these other 2 guys. Ben has separated himself from this group in a significant way. And that's notable. Going into this season, that this is not the kind of conversation we would have again. Again, we're talking about Ben Gregg as a potential starter and at minimum, a very key contributor. Ben played over 400 minutes last year. He's going to play that or more this upcoming season, almost certainly. Almost certainly. Probably over 500 minutes. 20 to 23, 25 minutes per game seems very plausible. Whereas with Huff and Perry, we'll talk more about them in future episodes, more about them as we get closer to the season, but neither of their roles are at all defined heading into next season. So these are 3 players who have gone, 2 have kind of stayed in the same direction. 1 has gone in a radically different direction in the last 11 months or so with Gonzaga. Finally, third and final bold prediction. This one's going to make people a little bit sad. Hunter Sallis is a lottery pick in the 2023 NBA draft. I actually called this my least bold prediction, which I think is funny in retrospect, because the Julian Strawther one probably seemed like the most bold at the time, but Doesn't look nearly as bold now, of course, because it ended up happening. But for Sallis, I mentioned that I thought he was going to come off the bench, that I thought that Rasir Bolton and Nolan Hickman were probably going to start. I mentioned I thought Malachi Smith would deserve to start as well, and that Hunter Sallis would compete to play a big role coming off the bench and could be a Zach Collins type lottery pick as a bench player for Gonzaga. Well, he did come off the bench, and he did play a decent role, although as previously mentioned hundreds of times during the regular season last year, I thought Hunter Sallis deserved to play more minutes. I thought his on-ball defense was such a weapon for Gonzaga on a team that didn't have a lot of good defensive players that, yes, the foul troubles were an issue and did prevent him from playing more minutes at times. And yes, his offensive game was inconsistent, I guess is the best way to put it. Very good at putting his head down and attacking the rim. Very good free throw shooter. Not a great three-point shooter, 27% or so last year, a little bit inconsistent there. I thought he made more things happen with the ball in his hands, and I thought he deserved more of an opportunity to play. But at no point last year did Hunter Sallis truly look like a lottery pick. Had he declared for the NBA draft and done really well in combine scrimmages and testing, which I think is possible, he's an elite athlete, I think there's a chance he could have gotten drafted, even after having a relatively nondescript season at Gonzaga. But instead, he goes to Wake Forest, where he will play big minutes for an ACC team and a coach in Steve Forbes, who has turned transfer guards into all ACC performers regularly. Jake LaRavia did it. He's in the NBA now with the Memphis Grizzlies. They've had a couple other guys who have done it as well. Hunter Sallis seems like he's next in line to be that guy. Which leads me to my next point. Could this prediction have just been a year off? Could Hunter Sallis explode next year for Wake Forest, average 15, 18 points per game, play elite level defense, and be a lottery pick? If so, how is the Gonzaga fan base going to feel? We'll talk about that were it to happen, of course, but I think it's possible. I don't know that it's super likely. I would be another bold prediction to make, at least as a lottery pick. Hunter Sallis being drafted eventually out of Wake Forest, frankly, doesn't feel that bold to me. I think it's very possible. In fact, I think it's likely that it'll happen for him at some point. A lottery pick as a junior, you have to be really, really good to get into that conversation. Possible, yes. Likely, maybe not. But still sad that this prediction didn't come true for Gonzaga and that we don't get to make another prediction about him, at least not in a Gonzaga uniform next season. Well, a pair of Gonzaga legends are on Team Canada's 18-man roster ahead of the FIBA World Cup. Will they both stick around for the Paris Olympics in 2024? More on that coming up right after this. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still locked on Zags, and we're going through ABCs today. A was Adams, Marcus Adams Jr., who we talked about in the first segment. B was bold for the bold predictions we just talked about in segment 2. C is Canada, as we close out the show talking about the 18 players selected for Canada's senior men's national team ahead of the FIBA World Cup, which is taking place between August 25th and September 10th. Canada will hope to qualify out of that event to potentially be a participant in the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris, France. And Kevin Pangos and Kelly Olynyk, two of the greatest Zags of all time, teammates for a couple of years in Spokane in the early 2010s. They are both on that 18-man roster for Team Canada heading into the Olympics. The roster is reportedly composed of players who are committed to play for both the summer and the winter FIBA events and committed to play for the team in Paris in the Olympics should they qualify. So if this Canada squad qualifies to make it to the Olympics, which they are expected to do so, Kelly Olynyk and Kevin Pangos could, in theory, be Olympians. Very fun story for them, of course. Two of the most iconic Canada basketball players in a long time, and Gonzaga has had this very rich history of Canadian players coming through the program. Rob Sacre is an example. Andrew Nembhard is an example. Brandon Clark technically qualifies to play for Team Canada. He would be an example. Of course, Clark is injured right now. Nembhard either did not get the invitation or chose to not participate in Team Canada at this time. Maybe that will change in the future. But they're going to take on France. They're going to take on Lebanon. They're going to take on Latvia in the initial group phase of the FIBA World Cup. I think they'll do quite well out of that group and should put them in a favorable position to qualify for the Olympics. However, the roster is eventually going to drop from 18 to 12. I have no doubt, zero doubt, that Kelly Olynyk will be one of those 12 players participating with Team Canada. I think he's going to be their starting center, and I think he's going to be a huge part of what they do offensively and defensively as a roster throughout the FIBA and the Olympic tournaments. Kevin Pangos, I'm less confident. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to redo the roster, and I'm going to talk about why that makes me a little bit less confident about Kevin Pangos' spot going forward. Here's the entire roster in alphabetical order. Kyle Alexander, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, RJ Barrett, Trey Bell Haynes, O'Shea Brissett, used to play for the Indiana Pacers, Dylan Brooks, been in the news a lot lately after his tumultuous time with the Memphis Grizzlies, Lou Dort, another very solid defensive NBA player there, Zach Edey, shout out Zach Edey out of Purdue, getting a chance to play for this team. Melvin Ejim, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren's teammate with the Oklahoma City Thunder, Corey Joseph, NBA veteran there. Jamal Murray, just coming off of an NBA championship, of course, with the Denver Nuggets. Kelly Olynyk, Kevin Pangos, of course, Dwight Powell, Cassius Robertson, Phil Scrubb, and Thomas Scrubb. That is your roster right there. For those of you who are NBA fans or who are very passionate Canada basketball fans or just basketball fans in general, you might have noticed there's a lot of pretty darn good guards on this roster. Jamal Murray is probably your starting point guard. Well, let's put it this way. Jamal Murray and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I mean, those are two NBA All-Stars, two of the best guards in the world right now, both on Team Canada's roster. The depth behind Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray includes Corey Joseph, an NBA veteran. It includes Nickeil Alexander-Walker, kind of an up-and-down NBA veteran as well. And it includes Lou Dort, who's a consistent NBA contributor, more for his defense than his offense, but still a solid NBA guy. All those guys are kind of ones you could kind of argue that, some of those guys could play the two, but they're all guards. And I think they're all ahead of Kevin Pangos on that depth chart, which makes me wonder if they got to cut 6 guys, if Pangos is going to end up making that roster or not. I'm not an expert. I'm not, the coach here. I haven't seen these guys play. Their skill sets are a little bit different. Pangos is more of a pure point guard than a lot of the guys on that list. Maybe that keeps him around, but I'm, again, very confident that Kelly Olynyk is not going to get cut. There's almost no chance that happens. It would be an absolute stunner. Unless he chooses not to participate, Kelly Olynyk is going to be with this team until the very end. But I'm less confident about Kevin Pangos. I hope he makes it, sincerely, because that would be so fun to see him get that opportunity. I want to watch this team, and I want to watch and see a pair of Zags participating, because I think that'd be really fun. But right now, I think he's probably right on the borderline, so we'll have to see what happens as roster cuts eventually start coming for Team Canada. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Always fun getting a chance to talk about pro Zags, getting a chance to talk about guys who were in the program a long time ago and what they're up to these days, especially when it involves the Olympics. Check back later this week. We got a ton of fun stuff coming your way. We got a summer league wrap up coming your way with somebody who was in the building and watched these guys play. We got some fun WCC conversation coming your way as well. And of course, continue to keep you up to date on what is happening with those open roster spots for the Zags, what's going on with Jose Perez, what's going on with Marcus Adams Jr., anybody else that the Zags may or may not choose to get involved with from a recruiting perspective. Again, Locked On Zags available wherever you get your podcast. Go check us out on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Also find us on Discord. We got the Locked On Zags Discord channel. There's a link posted in the show notes, chatting up there every single day about all the latest stuffs happening with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.